Okay, folks, I'm showing 12 noon on my clock, so we'll get started. Thank you, everyone, for attending with us today. Again, we got some old faces and some new faces in our Zoom attendees list, and we're really happy to have y'all here with us today to talk about trees and shrubs. The first day of October, so this cooler weather's got everybody wanting to get out and about in the yard, and this is a great topic. We've got a great group of panelists here, a wonderful slate of questions. We're looking forward to getting started. I think you probably know everybody here, but just in case, we'll do some quick introductions. Of course, my name's Daniel Leonard. I'm the horticulture agent and county director in Calhoun County. We have with us Larry Williams. Larry, say hi.
Hello. Larry. I'm in Okaloosa County and work with the residential population, homeowner horticulture, and master gardener program.
Yeah, we're happy to have Larry with us today. He brings a wealth of experience. We've got Stephen Greer with us, all the way in San Francisco County.
Yep. How are y'all?
Doing well. And we have Beth Bolles in the far western reaches of the Panhandle.
Glad to be with you today.
Yeah, and Mr. Ray Bodrey.
Good afternoon, everybody.
And behind the scenes, we've got Julie McConnell, Matt Orwatt, and Matt Lawler helping all of this run smoothly today. A couple of housekeeping things before we get started. While we're talking today, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to include those either in the Q&A or in the chat box. And with that, we'll try to get to those as soon as we can, and we'll get started. So we're going to begin talking about some planting preparations. Many of the questions were on that. You can't really get started talking about trees and shrubs without getting off on the right foot planting them. So we're going to go to Beth Bolles. We had several Zoom questions on this topic, variations of the same question, but the gist of it was, Beth, when is the best time to plant or transplant shrubs or trees for that matter?
Yeah, the good thing in our area up here in North Florida is that we're very fortunate that we can plant, especially container plants and shrubs, most any time of the year, as long as we give them the proper care. But we're really coming into a good season for planting. As we move into fall through winter and the very beginning of spring, that's a wonderful time for establishment of those plants. Our soils up in this area don't get too cold. Roots aren't going to grow quite as quickly, but they'll still have some activity through the winter to really get established before we get into the heat of summer. So think about what you want to plant, choosing the right plant as we talk about today for the right spot, and think about installing that fall through winter. Yeah,
that's so key. Definitely the best time that you want to be outside is when the plants also want to be planted. So that's right on. Beth, we'll stay with you. Again, this is one we had a couple of questions on. Considering climate changes in Northwest Florida, the last couple of winters have been really warm relative to our historical standards. Has the recommendation for when to plant trees and shrubs changed, or the general, December through February type recommendations the same?
Right, our general recommendations are going to stay the same to follow that. But, as weather patterns, we really have to look at those as gardeners because we never know what's going to come up. For example, going into last fall, we had an extremely dry September in the 90s. So maybe not the best time to, you hold off a month or so to start establishing just because water stress is going to be an issue. So, some of the warm winters, it may speed some of the rooting up on some of these plants. That may be a good thing. But in general, you're still going to follow those IFAS recommendations, but just know what's coming up and kind of what's happening in your area for planting. Now, one of the things that will change is not necessarily with the planting recommendations, but what you can grow. We're seeing changes with that. For example, years ago, and Larry, you probably know as well, being here so long, we didn't really grow a lot of Ixora. We didn't grow Thryallis. Now, we're seeing more of these plants, which are usually warmer climate plants, and we can grow a lot of those. We can't always grow a lot of the ones like dogwood that we used to as well, just because we're so warm too. So those are going to change, not necessarily our planting recommendations.
Yep, so that's certainly true. I've found even in my own yard, like with quote unquote cold hardy citrus, definitely the last 4 or 5 years gotten away with some citrus that probably historically shouldn't grow in Northwest Florida. So keep that in mind. Thanks, Beth. We've got Beth on a roll here, so we're going to stick with her. So we'll get to the rest of you guys here in just a second. But Beth, could you talk a little bit about planting depth? I know this is a critical topic for getting started. When the best time to transplant or plant a tree or shrub is, but if you don't plant it at the right depth, does that matter?
Oh, it matters so much. And there's a good publication that's going to be put in your Zoom chat and on Facebook to really go through this carefully. When we go out in the field to diagnose problems, one of the common things we often see when plants don't grow and they kind of sit there for years is it's either been installed too deeply or it's settled in that soil or too much mulch is on that trunk. So planting depth is critical. Remember, roots need air, and that air is at the surface. And so we want what's called the root flare, which is the connection between that trunk and root interface that kind of bulges out to be at the surface of the soil. So if that's underground, or a lot of times I tell people, if you see a trunk that's growing straight into the ground, it's often an indicator of planting too deeply. So it's critical for the plant. Some can tolerate this well, like a crepe myrtle. It's hard to kill that. But a lot of other plants, including palms, need to be planted at the depth they're supposed to be grown with that root flare at the ground level. In a pot, you may have to remove some soil when you're getting it ready for planting to look for that root flare, or a good way around it is plant at least 1 inch above grade. If it's a really big plant, you may plant 3 inches above grade with no soil over the top of that root ball. So that's a hard one. So read through that publication carefully, or give us a call. We don't want to hear from you about 5 years later when the tree's declined.
That's right.
Let's save that tree. That's a big investment for you.
Yeah, especially when it could be so easily prevented. So hit us up at your local extension offices if you have any questions on that. Very hard to plant a tree too shallow. It can be done, I guess, right, Beth? But it would be pretty severe.
Yeah, we don't see it too often
No.
for being too shallow. It's usually too deep.
Yep, always lean on that side for sure. And finally, Beth, on the same note there, when planting, how important it is to untangle the roots before covering them. I had a sort of a mentor one time that told me plants are a lot tougher than you think, and you can be pretty rough with them, and they like it. So
yeah, it used to be, oh, don't touch the roots, don't, leave them alone, they're so delicate. We really need to be careful with container plants, because think of your nursery. They may have some of these plants for a while in that container. They may get potted up into a large container and it's limited space. So they do kind of grow around each other. That can stay the same in the ground if you have larger roots that are circling or moving around that root ball if you don't cut through it. It is critical for you to either cut through that root ball well or shave off a portion of that root ball, especially with shrubs.
Really?
There's a good picture of that in the shrub document of how to shave off that root ball to encourage fast rooting and new rooting coming out. We often see this as well where a tree's not growing well, and when you remove it because it's declined, you have a big roots that circled it, that's girdled the stem. I had a man with some very expensive Japanese maples that lost both of them because of that situation.
Okay.
So don't be afraid to get in there and cut those roots, loosen up that root ball when you're planting.
Okay, that's awesome. Something you don't think about necessarily, but can be a real factor. Stephen, how are you doing?
Good. How about yourself?
Y'all hadn't fallen asleep over there while Beth's teaching us all about.
I was taking notes while she talked.
Yeah, that's right. So we had an interesting Zoom question here, and I'll kind of tell you what my take was on it. The question is, how do you successfully prepare for and plant volunteer crepe myrtles? So I kind of took this as like, what do you do? Like if you cut a crepe myrtle down, it's going to come back, and then the crepe myrtles like to root sucker a lot. So kind of interpreting it that way, what would your answer be?
From the perspective of root suckering, it's very difficult to try and, take those and move them anywhere else. It's better, there's times, and there's sound reasoning for having quality nurseries around here and looking for the new plant to start over with. you know, and if you're looking at preparing another area, let's just say you're going to break that root ball up, and do find some of those little suckers where you've got a little bit of side root in them.
Mm-hmm.
And make sure it's well-drained soils, some organics mixed into it, and it's full sun. That's real critical. Now, you know, we are seeing young seed crepe myrtles coming up from around plants as well.
Sure.
So you have to think about those, the consistency, or what I call inconsistency of bloom quality and leaf color change and those things from those plants. My dad did that a couple of times in his yard and was frustrated 5, 8, 10 years later, and then took them out. He was getting bloom about every third year on 2 of them.
Gotcha.
So, you know, from 2 perspectives, when you have to really take one back real hard and prune it back, either, let's just say, damage, be it winter, be it
Sure.
an automobile on the roadside, you've got a plant that's under stress. So are you going to try and revive it there? It is a tough plant, I will tell you that. And as we all well know, it'll reestablish itself. But then you have some of those areas of the trunk that are showing exposed wood and decay and some other things, and it does lead to a shorter life cycle for the plant.
So sometimes we may be just better off to buy a new one.
Let's help support the nurseries.
There you go. I hear that. There's nothing wrong with that. Support your local nurseries. Sometimes you're just going to get better consistency and better luck that way.
Yeah, that's true.
Kind of to wrap up this section on planting preparation, Beth, tell us a little bit about this next question, which we had several folks on Zoom ask, again, variations of the same question. This is something a lot of people are interested in. One of the more popular things that people call and come in and ask us in the extension office: should I always amend the soil in and around the root ball of trees and shrubs? Like, do they need to add fertilizer, compost, etc., things like that? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, and a lot of our previous sessions that we've done, we've talked about amending soils for vegetables and annuals and perennials.
Sure.
For trees and shrubs, it may not always be the case that we do that. If we're planting an individual tree or shrub, they've really found in the research no benefit, no harm by adding amended soil to the planting hole itself. Remember, these roots are going to move out within a few months and be well beyond that planting hole into your surrounding area. Where you can gain the benefit is if you are redoing a whole shrub bed and planting several shrubs and maybe a tree in there. Amending that entire planting area can be beneficial in our sandy or poor soils to get some nutrients, to get some microbe activity, to break down that fertilizer to make those nutrients available. That's where you're going to gain the benefit. So a lot of the research, it's not necessarily going to hurt. For individuals, it's really not going to help. Spend the money, like Stephen said, support your nursery, maybe buy a better quality plant instead of spending that money on individual amendments for the whole. So that's something you can think about.
Yeah. So you're saying it's almost better to either go ahead and spend the money, compost or amend the whole area, or go real cheap and don't do it at all.
Exactly. Yeah. You can spend money somehow. You know, if you're a plant person, it's going to be spent, just not on that.
Gotcha. Makes sense to me. Thanks, Beth. That's a fun answer. Ray, we'll wake you up down there in Gulf County, down there in the Eastern time zone.
I'm up.
Are you in Eastern right now, or are you in Weewall in the Central?
Actually, I'm up in Georgia. So
So you're in Eastern, but
does this classify as a multi-state effort for me then?
I think this might. So yeah. So as you know, 2 years ago, several of us here dealt with Hurricane Michael coming through. And then, you know, just a couple of weeks ago, those of us over in the west of Florida, you know, y'all are in our thoughts. I was over there I guess last weekend, helping some family do some cleanup in their yard. You know, our thoughts are with y'all after going through Hurricane Sally. So with that in mind, there's a lot of people that had damage to their landscape as a result of either high winds, floods, things falling on plants, things like that. And so the question I'm going to ask you, Ray, the person wants to know, should I cut back shrubs after the hurricane? They look terrible. So maybe wind beaten, rain beaten, things have fallen on them. What should they do?
Yeah, and unfortunately, I have some experience in this too.
Exactly.
Hurricane Michael, and I hope everyone over in the western side of the Panhandle is recovering well.
For sure.
My thoughts and prayers goes out those folks. Yeah, if you have some branch damage on your shrubs or your smaller trees, broken branches really can be cut, need to be cut. Be sure to use some really sharp implements to do so. Make sure they're sanitized, especially if it's something that you use a lot. Otherwise, I would leave any kind of pruning at bay for now. Any kind of seasonal pruning that you had maybe on your agenda, I would kind of leave that be for now, because of the foliage that's still on the trees and shrubs. That's an area where there's a lot of photosynthesis going on. That's how the plant gets its energy, and it's probably many of these plants are going through some trauma during this time, and they need
Sure.
that energy to kind of bounce back. But yeah, if there's anything that's damaged, I would definitely make some really clean cuts and get rid of those branches.
Yeah, and with hurricane season, I would think it would be critical to leave the leaves that are left because they're kind of getting their energy ready to go through the dormant period. So they need that energy to bounce back in the spring, right?
That's right.
Gotcha. All right. So there you have it on that. And so another hurricane related question, Ray. Should people remove the remains of tree stumps after they're ground, or can they be used to fill back the holes? So what are your thoughts on that? Do they need to remove those and fill it back with soil, or can they put it back in there? What do you think?
I'll tell you, I have a little experience with this too. And I had a lot of clientele after Hurricane Michael that
For sure.
Question too. Those stump grounds, if it's not a diseased tree, for sure, if it's a healthy tree that just, unfortunately fell to the storm, those kind of, stump grounds makes really good mulch, for your flower beds, and it's an excellent addition to your compost pile as well. And it can be used around other trees in your landscape, or like I said, around your landscape, around your home. I wouldn't necessarily use it to fill back in a hole, because it's really fresh organic matter that's going to break down if you bury it in that hole, and eventually you're just going to have a spot where it's, the soil through there's some subsidence going on. You're going to have a dip in the soil, and you're going to have to go back and probably refill with something else. I would highly recommend using any of those kind of mulch ground trees that you could use for mulch instead of using it to fill holes with. I mean, you could use it as a component, but I would use just some really good topsoil just to fill those holes, and that'll save you a lot of maintenance in the future with having to refill it or fill or put more soil on top of that.
For sure. Like I know where my parents built their house about 15 years ago now, was cut over pine trees. And, a lot of the stumps were just cut off at the ground and not removed in the yard. And so over time, those stumps have rotted out and there's holes all over the place. So, I mean, they weren't ground, but I would guess it would be the same principle. So
right. Makes
sense to me. Take advantage of that mulch that you have now for free. There you go.
That's right.
Yeah. Make lemonade out of lemons, right? So. Stephen, over in Santa Rosa County, of course, y'all dealt with that hurricane too. Hurricane
Yes.
down there.
A few inches of rain there.
Yeah, just a few. I mean, we had like 15 inches of rain in Calhoun County, and we're like 100 miles away from y'all. So, so the question here is, and this is a problem after Hurricane Michael, after Hurricane Ivan back in 2004, Hurricane Sally, always an issue. What do I do with my shrubs that used to be in the shade that are now getting a lot of sun because the trees that were shading them blew down?
That's a question that's tough, because now you've got a plant that's under stress for a lot of different reasons.
Yeah. And
that stress is not going to go away. In other words, the Florida sun, it's intense, it's long, it's hot. You have a lot of strong UV light going on. So if they're younger or smaller shrubs, you've got the ability to actually dig and move to another area has more of the shade, whether it be the shade of the house you can utilize, or some existing trees that just got through all that wind surge and things, and the storm surge from the water and everything else, and are in fair shade. And just prep the beds, get the organics back right in that area, and replace them back in there. The other option is just remove what you have, and I hate to say it, but sit back and actually take a little bit of time with a pen and paper or pencil and paper and draw out a small plan of an idea. Again, like I mentioned earlier, go by the nursery, talk to them about some things. They've really got some creative thoughts about what kind of plants you can utilize in that area. And eventually you can recreate a shade spot and go through it with it. So,
yeah, but I mean, it's going to be, you know, if you had a hydrangea bed, like a big leaf hydrangea bed, for instance, and a big oak tree that was shaded and blew down, you're going to have a tough time for the next 10 or 15 years till you get some shade there.
yeah, sometimes it'll wind up being somebody else in your family enjoying it. So
Yeah.
sometimes that's planning ahead for the landscape as well. Another thing to look at is actually a man-made structure. Create your own shade system out there.
That's true.
And have a filtration of light going through. You can be creative, make a nice little sitting area out there with walkways leading to it. If it's close enough to the house, make it an outdoor kitchen area. In other words, I like to grill outside. So,
All right.
there's all kinds of ways you can look at how to make that a fun spot.
Yeah. And that kind of goes along with Steven's article. If you subscribe to Gardening in the Panhandle, he wrote a nice article about outdoor living spaces. So check that out when we send that out either later today or tomorrow. So be sure to check it out. Thanks, Steven. That's a tough situation. You're just going to have to make the best of it that you can. Beth, y'all dealt with this in Pensacola. You know, I saw obviously there was storm surge. There are some folks, you know, went to bed and woke up with a barge in their front yard. So,
Several.
yeah. So, I mean, there was obviously storm surge. So if you happen to be near the water and had storm surge in your yard, when is it safe to go back and plant something into that soil that was just inundated with salt water?
Yeah, that's a tough one as well. It depends on the situation. One thing we did face with some of this surge is we had a lot of chemicals as well come up.
Oh, okay.
So that's going to impact plants for a long time. You know, we had people with oil in their yards. We have unknown chemicals all around. But if it is salt water, if we can get a good rainfall to help move that out, that's going to help kind of flush that out, and come in a few weeks, you may be able to plant right back in there and start your planting. It may be a good time to think about, you know, as water is coming up, you know, what are adaptable plants to that kind of situation. If you do have salt water already that can come up, you should be choosing some of those salt tolerant plants, some of those natives that are really adapted to that kind of condition anyway. But you may not want to jump right into it immediately and plant until we get some good rain to flush that back out, and that's, you know, that built up salt moves away.
Yeah, and so if you're over there in Santa Rosa or Escambia County, give either Steven or Beth Bolles a call, and I'm sure they can help you with that in your particular situation. You know, every site's a little bit different, and your goals are a little bit different. But thanks, that's perfect, Beth. Moving on from, of course, this is going to be also related. Everything that we talk about today is going to be somewhat related to Hurricane Sally because it did impact all of us. But yeah. We're going to talk a little bit about plant selection. And so we had a bunch of different questions. Again, these are two of the most commonly asked questions in the Panhandle, particularly during hurricane season. And we're going to go to Larry Williams. Larry, we hadn't heard from you yet. You're going to get your time to shine here. So Larry, in your opinion, again, we had a bunch of questions on this topic. People are real interested in this. What trees have the least damage in a hurricane? So what trees would you recommend that are real wind resistant for our clientele out there?
Thank you, Daniel. And I just want to say that I'm fortunate to have such a great team to work with extension agents in this part of Florida. They all do a wonderful job, some wonderful answers to questions, helping people. On that topic, people need to remember that when you plant trees, you're planting the future. You're planting everything that goes with that tree, good and bad. And you're planting something that changes over time, that more than likely will be with you. It'll be some of the longer lived plants as part of your landscape. So because of those three things, you would be wise to do some homework before just going out and purchasing or taking any tree that somebody might, you know, give you. You need to do your homework. And
yeah, for sure.
May not be fortunate in Florida to have to deal with these storms, but we are extremely fortunate to have some researchers at UF that do some wonderful things for us. And the best answer I can provide on this one is encourage you to read, to get your hands on. And I think this link is being provided to a University of Florida publication called Wind and Trees, Lessons Learned from Hurricanes. And that's exactly what's been done here. There were studies done following 10 different hurricanes, going all the way back to Andrew, you know, down into South Florida.
Early 90s, yeah.
That was in 92, I think.
Yep.
That was significant. But it includes Opal and they may do some studies with Michael. I would be surprised if they don't. Unfortunately, the 2 or 3 people that were directly involved with these studies have retired. But there's 10 different hurricanes that we've had going all the way back to Andrew, and even some that we've had here. Like if you remember Hurricane George, it had a pronunciation a little bit different. It was spelled like George's, but it was that was a flood event. But what they found is given in this publication, and I have it here in front of me, so I'm going to take just a little bit of time to look at a chart that they have in the back. It's actually on page 14. I think it's a 16-page publication. It's quite comprehensive. But the ones that are listed is
give us some of the favorites there.
Twofold for North Florida availability. Good luck on some of these. So
Yeah,
I'm going to quickly go through this and point this out. The Florida scrub hickory. Probably most of you have never heard of Florida scrub hickory, and good luck finding it. But
not widely available.
It happens to be one that stood up quite well to these storms. 10 different ones that they looked at least in the area of Florida where that tree is found. The Cornus dogwood, our native flowering dogwood. Now, for other reasons, I don't know that I would recommend that one, because in recent years we've seen a lot of problems with decline, and it has its limits. But it's not a shade tree as well. It's more of an ornamental tree. It doesn't get large enough in most cases to provide a lot of shade. Some of the hollies, such as the Dahoon holly, inkberry, which is a type of holly, American holly, and pond holly, all did well. Now, some of those, there's personal preference involved, and I know people that would say, I had somebody tell me, said, a farmer one time said, they really sell pond hollies. I've been spending a lifetime trying to control those on my farm.
They really do.
The crepe myrtle, which has been mentioned earlier, and there are some that will grow 20, 30 feet in height. Those fared well up in North Florida. This, believe it or not, the southern magnolia, but you need a lot of space to accommodate a standard southern magnolia. That's one that held up well. The sand live oak, which is some people say it's a subspecies, some people say it's not, but it's a live oak that grows along the coast. It's a little bit smaller, more compact, and I describe it as being kind of gnarly in its appearance, but it stands up, and it being a coastal tree, even growing on the dune system, some of those that have some age have had to withstand storm after storm. Now, the turkey oak's on the list, but I wouldn't recommend it because it has other problems. Yes, it may have stand up pretty well through the storm, but you're fortunate if it still looks good 30 years after it's been in the ground. It has some a complex root diseases that typically cause it to be a short-lived tree. The myrtle oak, another one that I would say good luck finding. But here's one that I would highly recommend if you have the space, and that is the standard live oak. There are cultivars that have come out, and it's well worth looking at some of those named varieties or cultivars in recent years of the Quercus virginiana, the live oak. The live oak is one of our longest lived tree species in this state. There are live oaks that have been documented to be 600 plus years right along the coast that have withstood storm after storm. Podocarpus, I don't normally consider as a true tree, but it could make a nice shrub, evergreen. And then the final one they have on the list, and this is in the list showing the highest wind resistance. It includes columns of medium wind resistance, or medium high, medium low, and lowest wind resistance. But in this column of highest wind resistance is also the sparkleberry, which is a vaccinium. It's in the, it's a slow grower, but I think well worth the wait, and I think it's underplanted. It doesn't grow large enough to make a really large shade tree, but I have seen some 20, 30 plus feet in height. There's one that I know in the north end of Walton County that may be a state record that's approaching I would say it's probably close to 40, 50 feet in height. It's a tremendously large sparkleberry. Those are some I would recommend. I would recommend getting your hands on this Wind and Trees Lessons Learned from Hurricanes IFAS extension publication.
Bingo. Check out that publication. Larry mentioned a bunch of good plants there. Some of our other panelists have added some plants down there that either did not or did hold up really well in the storm. Thanks, Larry. I mean, some of those live oaks are incredible. Like, you know, especially those sand live oaks. They've been here, you know, several hundred years. And like you said, there's no way to count how many storms they've been through. So, again,
And Daniel, I saw some following Hurricane Michael over in your neck of the woods that were
yeah,
completely defoliated.
yep,
That doesn't mean the tree's dead, despite it is an evergreen.
yeah.
But some of those will make a comeback. Even
Yeah, live oak's super cool. It has this defense mechanism where it will readily shed all of its leaves in high wind events. So it can take wind pretty well. So let's move to our next question. It's kind of related, Larry. You know, a lot of us lost trees in the hurricane, and the thing that people want to ask, particularly those of us, you know, who are near retirement age or a little older, want to know what are the fastest growing shade trees. You know, we want trees that are going to grow quick, give us more or less immediate gratification on there. And so what are some of those that you could recommend, and what can you tell us about quick growing shade trees?
you know, the question that a lot of people ask when they go into the nursery looking for trees that automatically rules out our best trees is what trees do you have that grow fast? Almost a built-in genetic factor with the fast growers is they're short-lived. They're typically very prone to breakage. We live in a high wind climate, Daniel. That's just a given. Even if you eliminate the, you know, not the average wind climate that we live in, but if you eliminate the hurricane activity, we still have frequent thunderstorm activity. And all of a sudden you have a thunderstorm that comes up that produces 30, 40, 60 mile an hour winds. Those come in quite frequently. And certain trees like the Bradford pear, silver maple, some of those will fall apart given a little bit of time. And that's what goes hand in hand with these fast growing trees. I would caution anybody in Florida's high wind climate to dedicate a lot of space in a landscape to those trees that grow fast. They're going to start falling apart. It may not be on your watch. You may sell the home. But even with the oak species, the laurel oak, the willow oak, the water oak, laurel oak, and willow oak, we have a lot of laurel oaks in landscapes. Mm-hmm. When that tree approaches 50 years old or so in a landscape environment, it will begin to have a lot of dieback in the top. It's normal
for sure to
see a laurel oak at about 50 years old begin to have a lot of small limbs and eventually larger branches and limbs that eventually begin to die. That's normal for that tree species. But a 50-year-old live oak is a young whippersnapper.
That's a baby.
Many more years.
Yeah.
So even with the oaks, you have to be careful. One final thing I'd like to say on this, well, there's an article that I wrote there's a link to that. I hope that is shared.
Yep, it's in the chat.
But this fast growing business, if you plant most of your landscape in those fast growing trees, you're going to all at the same time, somebody developing a new landscape, a number of years later, you're going to be dealing with all of those trees experiencing decline in just a few years, all, you know, close proximity, causing damage. And then, you know, you have a tree that becomes an eyesore versus an asset. But worse than that, some of these large growing species, genetically don't make a very large tree. You eventually have a tree that's considered to be a hazard. And I just would caution people to steer clear of that. If you plant trees correctly, like Beth Bolles mentioned earlier, yeah. And the first 5 years or so, make sure you're watering and fertilizing in a landscape situation. After about 5 years, you don't gain much from fertilizing trees. But that first 5 years, it's surprising how fast a slow growing tree can grow if under planting correctly and good management.
For sure. So Larry, Matt Orwatt had typed in the chat that he liked sycamore, and I posted in there that just anecdotally I'd seen some large green ash, which is a native ash species that grows quite fast, but it held up really well during Hurricane Michael. Anecdotally, and I don't have any empirical evidence, just kind of what I've seen.
Yes.
You would say, based on what your experience is, that those would maybe more exceptions rather than the rule, that fast-growing trees just generally don't hold up super well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Be careful, very cautious about, in a high wind climate such as Florida, overdoing it with fast-growing trees.
Gotcha. And Beth, I included this question, even though we had a lot of questions similar to this, but this one is just in literally the same neighborhood as your office. So, actually just right down the street from where some of my family lives on West Roberts. So I thought this was interesting. A couple in their 70s here asked an email question for Stefani Road. What are some fast growing trees that this couple might be able to enjoy and that maybe their heirs would not have a big problem with down the road?
Yeah, right after Larry, huh? I get this one.
Yep.
So Larry gave you some really good advice, but we still want some shade, a little more quickly because, trees too take a while to get a size. So here along Stefani, we did lose quite a bit of trees like many other places. It was heavily wooded. So you may consider something like the willow oak. Larry mentioned that. It starts out with a very nice shape, very pyramidal, strong limbs, come out 90 degrees. It'll be more open canopy as it gets older. That's an option for you for a nice oak tree. You may consider a single trunk river birch. Never choose a multi-trunk river birch that's going to be anywhere close to people and homes. We just had to cable one at the cost of $2,400.
Wow.
So, you don't want a hazard within 10, 15 years,
So tell
which
us
it will be.
why that would be a problem.
Well, a multi-trunk tree like that, you have a lot of weight up top and you have a very weak bark connection. So there's not a lot holding that plant together. And when the wind pulls on that top portion of the canopy, it causes a split. And that's where in hurricanes, we see a lot of our damage is from very weak embedded wood and poor connections. So these trees have to be on a maintenance plan. You may consider something like a tulip poplar if you have the right conditions for that. That one may like a little bit of moisture. And then, a sycamore if you have room. These are big, big trees. So it's not always one, if you can put it back on the landscape in the corner where it's not going to be a hazard, but has plenty of room to grow. Those may be a few options for you.
Thanks. And that really goes right along with what Larry said. I just thought that was interesting because it was in the neighborhood. So thank you, Beth and Larry. If y'all follow their advice on those couple of tree questions there, you're going to have a lot lower likelihood of having problems in your landscape in the next hurricane. Because we know it's not when, or not if, but when, when the next one is coming. So, so we're going to have a little fun here right now. So we had a Zoom caller that wanted to know what trees and shrubs grow locally with wine colored or purplish, blackish colored foliage. And so I want to do kind of go around the table here and ask everybody to pick one. So we'll start with Beth. Beth, what would be your favorite wine colored foliage plant for our area?
One of the ones I like is somewhat of a frost tender plant. It's a Pennisetum grass, Napier grass called Black Knight. There's a smaller version called Princess Caroline, but it is truly an accent grass. It's not going to look great in the winter, but once it comes back out in late spring, summer, you are going to have a truly accent, wonderful kind of wine colored foliage ornamental grass.
Is this similar to the more common, the purple fountain grass?
It is a little bit different. The purple fountain grass is not going to be quite as robust. It's not going to be as wide of a blade. The Napier grass, Black Knight, is just really a showpiece in a landscape. If you can compare it with some finer textured foliage, it's going to be magnificent.
Awesome. You can count on Beth to come up with some cool plant selections. Ray, tell us a cool purple foliaged plant that you enjoy in the landscape.
I can tell you one. It may be a little difficult to find, like a lot of these plants,
Sure.
even if they're native or even if they're exotic, but or
Adapted exotic there.
yeah, let's just say that maybe a
Yeah.
little more difficult to find, but there's one that's called a Japanese barberry. This is more of a large shrub. It could grow into kind of a subtree. It has some really pretty fall foliage, fall color to it. Let's see, it's one of those though. It's not very salt tolerant though, so probably not one you want to
Gotcha.
plant near the coast. But really has really pretty wine kind of fall color.
If you're inland, check that one out. Larry, what you got for us with purple foliage real quick?
I really like the Japanese maples. They're not native, but they do quite well. We're somewhat pushing its southern limit here, so you have to be careful. It's not a true coastal plant, but if you have the right place, there are some named varieties. You've got the seedlings that there's quite a genetic variation in these Japanese maples, but there's some named varieties or cultivars such as Burgundy lace. And burgundy, would hint at the color of the foliage. It does have that wine burgundy type color to the foliage, but the lace part of it is a really fine textured foliage, leaves. Don't just plant it anywhere. Put it, the best place to put any Japanese maple in this far south is where it gets the morning sun, but is protected from the harsh evening sun. It needs to be in a bed with mulch and preferably good organic matter, and you need to keep it moist, watering it to carry it through dry periods. But they're beautiful plants.
I concur. Stephen, you got one that you would like to share with us? If not, that's quite all right.
No, I typed it in there, but I've got a weakness just like Larry about Japanese maples. I do like the lacy leaf, the dissectums.
So you want Crimson Queen or something like that?
Yeah, and there's an old one out in the market called Garnet, and it's been there a long time. It has more of a burgundy color, but you've got some shifting changes in the leaf color as you go through the season. You start out in that light green color, and it gets more of a mature green, and then it goes to that burgundy color, and then you have a decent kind of an orangey red color with some of the leaf changes it's trying to drop. And I agree with Larry. Same thing. You've got to find some of that dappled shade, or you're going to be disappointed.
Yeah, for sure.
I've ridden through a lot of old southern towns over the years and see them planted right there when people are pulling up along a sidewalk, and it's planted between the sidewalk and where the cars are parking, and that's sad.
Yeah, but in the right spot, that can be quite a long-lived plant, that's fairly
It can.
if you site it correctly. And finally, I'll wrap it up. My favorite one don't plant it as a shrub right under your window that you got to trim all the time, but plant it out in your landscape. And these are the larger loropetalum cultivars like Ruby, the old-fashioned one, or Zuzu, sometimes called Zuzu fuchsia. These, let them grow into a small tree, limb them up at the bottom, and they do make a wonderful small tree that flowers for you in the spring. I love that. Every landscape that I've owned, I really try to include a loropetalum in there and just let it be what it wants to be, which is kind of this large, open, fountain-like purple shrub. So with that, let's move on. Beth, we've got a question here. Y'all don't have as much shade in Pensacola as you used to, but what are some recommendations on shrubs that can go in the shade that do really well?
Yeah, a lot of times people don't realize the value of that shade. It's super hot here. Shade is wonderful to have in our landscape, and we have so many variety of plants that we can grow. So you can think of some of the common things that we normally grow, but some of the good ones would be start with a Florida anise. You got a little bit of moisture. It's a great evergreen plant. There's some new mahonias out there, one called Marble Mahonia, which is like your leather leaf. That's a very narrow plant with these brilliant yellow flowers that bees love in the winter. You have soft caress Mahonia, which is a good evergreen that's lower growing that will love that shade. One that I love are the plum yews. You have one that's a ground cover that kind of spreads and goes more in width. And then you have an upright one that's a really interesting accent plant that you could do. And then finally, go to some of the old favorites. We love Sasanqua camellias. Ones I love Leslie Ann with kind of a pink and white. And I love the hybrids like Snow Blizzard. Bees
Yeah.
love that one in the winter. It is a bee magnet when other things aren't blooming.
And
So
that's a John
lots.
Davy selection
It
from Santa
is.
Rosa
That's where
County.
we got. We were fortunate enough. He donated one to us. It is a beautiful hybrid camellia. So
Yeah.
some of your old favorites, some new things being developed that you can find too that love the shade. So lots of
There you go.
options.
Awesome. And so kind of along those lines, Ray, maybe it's not necessarily in the shade, but what are some really good shrubs that folks can put up near the house that won't take over the house and will be fairly low maintenance for them?
Yeah, because that can happen.
It can.
It can happen. You really want to look for, watch out for any kind of plant that has some really meandering, intrusive kind of root system, a strong root system. Or obviously, you don't want to plant anything like that close to your foundation, and some of these shrubs can end up being subtrees at some point in their life and can damage the root roof system. So that's something you want to kind of do your homework on, and that Florida Friendly landscaping guide and plant selector is a good place to start for that. If it's anything like that, if it's going to be a shrub that's going to potentially turn into like a subtree one day, I would definitely recommend placing that, thinking of it as a tree eventually, and placing it probably 10 to 15, maybe even 20 feet away from a home. But back on plants that you can plant close to your home, you got to think about too where the sunlight's going to be, where the sunlight's going to fall on your home on those sides of your beds around your home. That's going to, there's a number of plants like Beth was referring to that can handle some lower light conditions. Hostas are good. Anything that has more of a, kind of a grass-like root system that's going to grow on top of the ground, I think are good plants to grow around the home. But there's always the traditional favorites too, like Indian hawthorn, even podocarpus are some that you can grow around the home. But yeah, and even bunch grasses. I'm starting to see this as kind of like a little bit of a trend in my area where you're seeing some of these, not necessarily native, but there are some native bunch grasses that look really nice, but you're starting to see some more of those into the landscape too around the house as well.
Yeah, for sure. I was just, you beat me to it. I was just about to add, if you didn't get to it, I was like, man, I love these folks that are starting to add like muley grass and Fakahatchee grass and the, what is the one breeze, Beth, that you enjoy? Lamandra. That's
Lamandra. Yeah.
Lamandra. Yeah. So yeah, Ray's right on that. Those bunch grasses, think outside the box. Maybe you can use them as a foundation shrub. And kind of along that line, Beth, Ray mentioned some really good stuff there. Do you have any sort of small native shrubs that somebody might want to add into a little shrub bed or a garden area?
Yeah. Now, sometimes when people say small, they say they want 1 to 2 feet. That's
what
going to
we're
be
thinking.
hard. Yeah.
Yeah, small, real small.
Yeah. You may have to go a little bit bigger sometimes, but some good options you may consider that are going to be maybe under 5 or 6 feet. You could do Kunti, which is a nice native that's palm-like in its look. It's a nice cycad. You could do Conradina if you have well-drained soil. You cannot plant that if the soil is not sandy, but it is a wonderful shrub with purple flowers. Darrow's blueberry, if you've got acid soil, that's a nice little shrub with some, flowers on that as well for bees. There's for a wet site, you could do Henry's Garnet Itea or Sweet Spire.
Mm-hmm.
That has really brilliant red color in the fall. I like that one quite a bit.
Yeah.
If you don't mind some deciduous and dying back, coral bean is interesting. It'd give you a different look for sure.
Yeah.
Of that one with a spike that hummingbirds like.
Very unique.
And maybe, Fetterbush. We don't use that one a lot, but that's an option. And then the good thing about the nursery trade, there are new selections of hydrangeas like oak leaf that are smaller that, you can try. So, look for those type plants as well.
Yep. With the rise in, smaller landscapes, there's a lot more of these options than there used to be, especially with the native nurseries really stepping up. So thanks, Beth. That's awesome. Again, we're going to do kind of a round table quickly and just kind of hit some favorites from everybody on this. I think these are kind of popular questions for folks. So we're going to go around quickly on what's a good mid-sized evergreen for a small landscape. And so I'm going to echo, I'll just start us off here. I'm going to echo what Beth said earlier. I really like, especially these columnar, the more compact hydrangeas, like again, Leslie is a nice one. It'll get larger, but it's still fairly, columnar as a plant. But then you can get even smaller to like the shishi cultivars, like Alabama Beauty, and some of those that are real narrow. There's October Magic Rose. So anyway, just those compact Sasanquas. Beth, what would you recommend for some folks?
I mentioned this one earlier. It's one of the plum yews, fastigiata. It's very upright. It's narrow. It's kind of an accent shrub. It does like a little bit of shade. It may have a little bit of struggle in our hot afternoon sun, but it's really a nice, narrow plant that's evergreen.
And you have many of these plants in your garden there at the extension office, don't you? If somebody
we do.
There you go. So come visit the Escambia County Extension Garden. It's an excellent little teaching tool. So Ray, what's one that you might recommend for somebody looking for a good mid-sized evergreen in a small area?
Yeah, I like the podocarpus. I've had those in my yard before. I really like those because they're easy to sort of prune and manage, and you can shape them.
Yeah.
A little bit of a drawback to them is they get older, they get a little more woody, and if you really start to prune them back, they don't look that great, but they will for some time. And they come in the sizes and the prices for them are very economical.
Yeah, that's a good budget pick there. I like that. I will say we've got one at our extension office. Nobody ever pruned or shaped it, and the thing's now about 40 feet tall. So
yeah,
I
love that.
Yeah, it can be cool either way, but yeah. Larry, what you got for us?
I lean toward some of the Sasanqua camellias.
All right.
You have to make sure
there's room on board for all of us.
You have to make sure that it is, if you want a smaller plant, do your homework again and select one that is a dwarf, compact plant.
Very good.
I've got one in my landscape, and I don't really know the cultivar, the name, other than it is a Sasanqua, and it's starting to bloom already. Started showing some color late September, this first day of October, and it is about to pop. It is loaded. I don't think you put any more buds on it, but there are some of the Sasanqua type camellias that are dwarf and compact, and there are even some of those that are mounding in their growth habit that will not grow much taller than 2 or 3 feet in height, and sometimes a better width than that. Maybe 3, 4, 5 feet in width, but only 2 or 3 feet in height. Do your homework on the dwarf Sasanqua camellias.
Yeah, that species is one of the most versatile out there for sure. Stephen, you're welcome on the Camellia Sasanqua bandwagon, or you can share another species that you have.
I'm going to back up to actually Dahoon holly. There's a yellow berried one that I really like. It's more of a shrub, large shrub. I've got it in my yard, so I'm playing with it to see how it turns out. But I like the berry color on it. It's very unique. It doesn't have that orange or red color you often see.
There you go. Dahoon holly, a neat native for our area. So these are kind of some answers that we had already talked about, but I know Beth wants to share another one, and I kind of have one too, and we'll ask the group also. What's a good native shrub to plant as a screen? So if you've got an area where you don't want to see the neighbors, but you want a native plant too, Beth, what could we do? Yeah,
one of my favorites is saltbush or baccharis. It's just starting to bloom right now. Really nice, kind of light green foliage. The whitish, yellowish blooms will be all over it. And we have a lot of our butterflies, monarchs, and fritillaries that it'll be a magnet. So think about that used as a screen. You'll also have some seedlings that pop up too.
Yeah.
So you'll have some free plants.
There you go. Mine is saw palmetto. There's a couple of different variety, selections. There's plain green. There's a silvery blue one. Get creative. It's a real nice coastal look. Very low maintenance. Once a year you go in there and prune out those dead leaves. Good pollinator friendly plant, wildlife friendly plant. So for a unique selection, there's one. Do the rest of you guys have a sort of a native screening plant you'd like to throw out there for us?
This is Larry. I think and there's personal preference, of course, but I think the Walters viburnum is still an underused plant.
I like that.
That does lend itself to a hedge, and it does respond well to pruning, and you get some white flowers, and I think it's more in springtime.
Yeah.
Walters viburnum
I like that one. Yeah, I've actually got a little screen, an informal low screen of the world-class cultivar of Walters viburnum in my yard, and it's been awesome. Steven, what you got?
Okay, well, a lot of times I think about the calls we get. Somebody's looking for something immediate, and they're looking at a quick thing. So I oftentimes back up to the wax myrtle. Look at that as kind of the start. And if there's enough space, you have the primary starting behind it or in front of it that'll eventually become the true hedge.
I like that.
A little bit
Those
of
are some
speed,
great options.
and then take those out.
Great options from everybody there for some screens that are native in nature. We've got a couple, 4 questions that are just kind of in a category of their own. Larry, we're going to come to you. Do shrubs have a life expectancy where the only option is to replace them, not rejuvenate them? What do you think about that?
Absolutely, and I'm going to encourage people. I put in as a link an article that I wrote, and I think it was back in the fall of late summer of 2017, but I reread it, and it ended up being one of my favorite articles. I'm not bragging on myself, but I'm gonna read just a section of it. A New Yorker cartoon shows a lady shopping a garden center bench for plants. She has 3 choices at 3 price points: annual $6, perennials $10, eternals $749.95. Well, there's not really an eternal plant, but the point is plants do genetically have a life expectancy. So you want to plant the right place, learn what it likes and provide it. And when the plant reaches the end of its life, replace it. So many homeowners spend more than $749.95 attempting to turn a short-lived plant into an eternal plant.
This is true. Sort of a mic drop there for you, Larry. Go buy a new plant when they get old and start to decline. Thank you. Steven, this is kind of similar. I've had a native azalea for a number of years. It's probably in the wrong spot though, and I'm running out of space. What can I do?
Well, you might want to look at it from 2 option points. It sounds like the space has run out. So do you try and take cuttings, which you might want to consider if you really like that plant, and do your fall cuttings and get them rooted and ready for the next year cycle. Really, they need to be up to a 1-gallon container within about a year or so. Just getting a decent sized plant before you try and move it. The other option is, if it's small enough, dig it, move it. We're moving into that time of the year where you can do that. If it's large, you may need a pretty solid piece of burlap and some landscape nails, and dig it properly all the way around and have a solid root ball in there. Wrap it, put the nails in, and use that solid twine to really wrap around that root ball and get it firm so you can lift it out. And I do caution, lifting out can be several hundred pounds if it's large enough. So find a neighbor who's got a tractor.
or a strong deadlift that they've been working on. So
That's right.
Anyway, thanks, Steven. Yeah, so sometimes those are your options. Them's the breaks, as they say.
Yeah.
Larry, we're just gonna switch back to you here. You and Larry, you and Steven, we're just switching back and forth here at the end. Larry, I've been told that some trees, now I like this question, take in oxygen from a special ring around the trunk at ground level, so you need to be careful around the base. And now I think this person is on the right track here, but tell me what you think.
Yeah, Beth mentioned this earlier when it comes to planting, and I've heard applied to plants concentrate on growing roots, not shoots.
Yeah,
I think that applies to lawns as well. But in this case, tree roots have to have oxygen. And if you do anything to interfere with that, especially if it's a sudden change, like building a raised bed over the roots of a tree, changing the grade, raising the grade, smothering the roots, mulching too heavily, too thick of a layer of mulch. We recommend 2 or 3 inch layer after the mulch has had a chance to settle. But much more than that, you can cut off the air supply, the oxygen supply to those roots, and it can play a detrimental role in what would have been a long-lived tree that ends up living a much shorter life.
Yeah, so while there's not a quote unquote, like a magic special ring around the bottom of the tree, there are some critical jobs that the base of the tree and the root interface and all of that does play. So watch out for that. Larry, you're spot on there. Appreciate it. Steven, our final question for the day, right on time for the first time ever. This is incredible. Thank you guys for keeping me on track. Steven, my butterfly bushes are very large and starting to look straggly, which can happen. should I remove them? And I specifically gave this to you because you've been in North Carolina where butterfly bushes are a little more popular than they are here. So
They are, and you just told me I have 1 minute, basically is what you
you
told
have
me.
1 minute. No, you can
Okay.
take the time that you need.
Well, butterfly bushes, they can be a real interesting thing to see bloom and a large attractant to a lot of different flying insects, all the way from butterflies on down. But you do have a certain amount of dieback that occurs in them, and they do have a short life. So you have to keep all those things in mind. If it's been in for, let's say, 5-6 years, you may begin looking at, is this coming toward the end of the plant? If it's not, and you just have some branches that have died out, you may prune and just keep it well mulched and push it for a couple more years and hopefully have good performance. Other than that, sometimes it's quicker just to pull and dig that thing out and try again.
Yeah, and you know, we're kind of at the southern end of a lot of the Budleia range. Is that correct?
Yes, yes, it is. And, you know, it is, we dealt with even cold damage with it and had to, you know, they're prone to the ground and mulched over heavily up there during the winter cycle.
Yeah, we're the opposite. They don't
Yeah.
like all the heat. So
Well,
I would,
you wait until that 20-degree night.
yeah, and so I would say, you know, when you get done with this particular iteration of your butterfly bush and it doesn't come back, plant a vitex, the native chase tree. Very similar look and feel, and it's also a good pollinator attractant and a native plant that's going to live a lot longer for you.
Yeah, it's really good drought tolerance in it.
There you go. So that's kind of all of the questions we have today. I appreciate all of you tuning in. I think we covered a lot of ground in a short amount of time. I invite you to tune in for our next session in 2 weeks. I believe that's going to be on cool season gardening and cold protection. So hopefully in the next 2 weeks, you will have gotten out there in the garden and enjoyed this wonderful weather we're experiencing. I'm kind of jealous of folks who are out in it today. And so you guys got any parting thoughts for us before we get off?
Just a great job, and I appreciate the opportunity to help.
Yes, for sure. I mean, you guys are why we do what we do. We love helping you in your gardens and your landscapes, and we hope to be able to do that again back here in 2 weeks. So join us then. And for Beth, Larry, Stephen, Ray, Julie, Matt, and Matt, we'll see y'all in 2 weeks. Thank you. This has been Gardening in the Panhandle Live yet again. Y'all have a good afternoon.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.